September 11th, 2001. It started off as a normal, bustling day in New York City. That was until 8:46 a.m. when American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Within seconds of the crash, New York police officers and firefighters began hurrying to the scene. 17 minutes later, at 9:03, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. At 9:31, President Bush called the attacks in New York City an apparent terrorist attack on our country. 6 minutes later, after this statement from our former president, hijackers aboard Flight 77 flew the plane into the exterior of the Pentagon, located in Washington, D.C. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed, the North Tower following 29 minutes later. On September 11, 2001, 2,977 American citizens lost their lives. Americans were left in shock. They held candlelight vigils for the victims of the attacks. They wept for family members who lost their lives. But most importantly, they came together. The sense of nationality spread across the country. People of different races and religions came together to support their country. Musicians, actors, and comedians alike began pledging their support as well. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, appeared on SNL alongside New York City firefighters to pay tribute to those lost during this tragic terror attack. President Bush threw out the first pitch in Game 3 of the World Series in 2001. Alan Jackson wrote the infamous song, "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?", which ties into the 17-year-old question, where were you on 9/11?
So, my experience with 9/11 was, I think I was a junior in high school at Cave Spring High School, and I'll never forget, I was in Mr. Matthews' math class, and I remember watching the actual plane, the second plane come in and hit, and that was kind of when, at that point, we all were pretty freaked out. We were like, oh, this is not like an accident, and this was not something that, we knew at that point it was a terrorist attack. I think anytime, there's, like in wars and things like that, there's a common enemy or a common threat, it has the ability to unite, a school or team, a country, whatever it may be.
Through this tragic event, citizens of the United States came together to show love and support, though not to everybody. After the events on 9/11, a new breed of discrimination was born. Discrimination against Muslims and Middle Easterners. All 19 hijackers were Middle Eastern or Muslim men who had affiliations with Al-Qaeda. Muslim and Middle Eastern men and women all over America started getting treated differently. They were getting blamed for this tragic event. All of a sudden, there became a new wave of discrimination in America.
Well, of course, there's the increase in profiling at the airport and other places. That's almost given in this day and age. And as I mentioned, for both mosques in Bluefield, where I used to live in Roanoke, have been vandalized before. There's been targeted killings, as there was in, I believe, Iowa or some Midwestern thing, and then targeted killings that were accidentally mistargeted against Sikh individuals in Canada. So there's been a lot of targeting and different misconceptions about Islam.
Among the events following 9/11 was the passing of the USA Patriot Act, short for the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. There were 10 titles to this act. These 10 titles provided solutions such as, but not limited to, domestic security, surveillance, border security, terrorism criminal law, and improved intelligence. The Patriot Act had many pros and cons. Pros: increased the chances of catching terrorists, and since its conception, at least 50 terrorist attacks have been thwarted. Cons: the Patriot Act has been used to catch more drug dealers than terrorists. Increased racial profiling. It violates Section 505, dealing with discriminating based on speech, and it violates the Fourth Amendment, dealing with unlawful searches and seizures.
So the Patriot Act was passed by Congress in response to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. The purpose of the act was to increase Congress's ability and the federal government's ability to counteract terrorism, to infiltrate and try to find out about terrorist plots. And the biggest controversy that came out of it was trying to balance safety and personal liberty and the wiretapping provisions that it allowed for. So people were concerned that in this quest to combat terrorism, that people's personal civil liberties, their privacy, was being infringed upon in order to combat terrorism.
Overall, the events of 9/11 and those following have created an emotional roller coaster for American citizens. The candlelight vigils held for victims, the coming together of a nation, the discrimination of Middle Eastern men and women, and the Patriot Act can be seen as a time of mourning for America. And I'm sure you're wondering how this makes you feel American. Well, think about it like this. When you're a part of a team, or in this case something much larger, you're in it for the long run. You're in it for the ups and downs, the victories and the losses. You live in the greatest country in the world, and you should be proud. You are American.